Salutations, everyone. Hope that this finds you well, happy and healthy and safe. As I record this, we are in interesting times, to say the least, both as a society and as a planet. And I've noticed myself just for the last 3 or 4 months, I just feel like I'm sort of in a full body contraction. So today we're going to work some poses that we'll get into: neck, shoulders, back, hips, hamstrings, sort of all the yogic hot spots. Equipment-wise, a yoga block, very helpful. These are pretty easy to find nowadays, so if you don't have one, you could certainly use something sturdy and squarish, like maybe a big book that you could throw a towel or something over to kind of smooth out the rough edges. And a folded blanket might be helpful in the seated poses later. So we're going to start on our backs though, and this block is going to kind of travel down our back. So we're going to find our way with knees bent, feet on the floor. Take your block and let it run sort of vertical. And we're going to bring that mostly behind the upper back. So you want that more or less to land maybe at the base of the neck. And just let your head kind of hang from the bottom of that block. And if you feel like you need some support there, a pillow could be very helpful, like a very small pillow, not like your sleeping pillow. Or you could put like a small book under there, just to kind of bridge that distance between the crown of your head and the floor. This block is going to move 3 stations down our back, 3 minutes at each time. So for this one, I like to keep my knees bent, feet on the floor. It just feels like it gives my back a little bit more support. And you can let the arms hang alongside you with the palms up. And close your eyes, because this is somewhat of an inversion. And your breath, you're going to let that just find a natural rhythm for you here. This is a very good pose if you spend a lot of time looking down at your phone. Now I find sometimes in the beginning stages of this pose, with my head hanging the way it is, I get a little anxious and I might even kind of grip through this pose. So try to, if you need to, let your breath fall out of your mouth a few times. And see where you can soften within the pose. And then usually at this point, I just kind of let my knees fall into each other. We got about 1 more minute here. About 3 more breaths. And you'll need to engage a little bit of core and maybe even press your shoulders into the block a little bit to help you lift your head up. And then roll to your right side. And you're just going to come up a little bit. Then turn your block the other way, so almost sort of horizontal, and move it down a little bit so that when you come back onto the block, it's maybe behind your back ribs. You don't want it behind your shoulder blades, but maybe behind those back ribs. And then we're going to set our timer again. We're going to come back down, so same idea. If you feel like you still need something under your head and shoulders, feel free to grab that. Now at this point, I'll bring the soles of my feet together and let my knees drop open. If that doesn't feel supportive for you, keep your feet on the floor, maybe the knees into each other. I really love this pose as a way of sort of expanding the capacity for your breath in the chest and the lungs and the ribs. This is also, if you know anything about the chakra system, this is a great way to open up your heart chakra, your solar plexus chakra, where in some times of stress or unease, we kind of put a little shell in front of our heart. Again, you can let those eyes be closed. We've passed our halfway point. Last minute in this position. You're going to stay in this position for a few more breaths, but if you opened up the legs, go ahead and bring the soles of the feet back to the floor. If you have the knees together, go ahead and take them apart. You're going to lift your head a little bit. Again, roll to your right side. We're going to take the block out from under us. We're going to leave it in that same horizontal shape. Come back down onto your back. Then we're going to lift up the hips, slide the block under that low back tailbone. And I would say keep it low here, just because we haven't really done a lot to warm up. And again, 3 minutes in this shape. Now at this point you might bring your arms out like little goalpost or letter T shape here. I love this pose because if you have a low back issue, back bends are actually really good for you to do. And this is a good way to build the muscle in that low back with some support there so that you're not having to engage hips or hamstrings. So it's a good idea to just kind of remember that you're letting the block do the work in this position. There are some days that I do this pose and I'll just fall asleep in it, and only to be awakened by my timer. I'll talk less in case you want to doze off. more than a minute left here. Bring the arms in a little bit closer to us. Now we're going to move into a twist on this block, which will be a little interesting maybe for some. So we're going to roll, I like to scoot over a little bit to the left, and then we're going to roll to the right so that that block is directly under that right hip. We're going to extend that left leg straight, and then you can either have that right knee bent or extend that right leg out to the side here. We're going to do this for 2.5 minutes on each side. You can either use your arm to support your head there, or you could use that blanket. And if this feels too weird with the block, like this is uncomfortable in your hip or your low back, you could lose the block. That was a little bit of a tongue twister. So if the block is not supporting you and it's hindering your experience here, come out of that part. And again, remember, you're using the block to support you, so you don't have to hold anything up. And there's not much to see, so you could close your eyes here. I'll let you know when it's time to come out of it. You have a little more than a minute here. A little bit more than 20 seconds here. All right, now this is an interesting shape to come out of. So you're going to bend the knees, and you're going to roll onto your back into that bridge pose with that block underneath you. I'm going to turn around on the mat. You don't have to do that. You can slide your hips over to the right and then roll over onto your left hip. I'm just doing it this way so that you don't have to stare at my butt for the next 2.5 minutes. So left leg's going to be kind of in front there, maybe bent, maybe straight. Now if you use the block on the other side, I highly encourage you to use it here. You might have to just bend the knee if this tends to be a tighter side for you. If you didn't use the block, don't insert here. We're trying to maintain some degree of symmetry here. Again, just check in, especially in this core, hip, glute, leg region, that you're not tightening or engaging anything. A little bit more than a minute here. A little bit more than 20 seconds. All right, so again, kind of an interesting pose to come out of. So as you bend that one leg, you're going to roll onto your back, get that block underneath you just for about 2 more breaths here. Then press your feet into the floor, take the block away, just go ahead and move it out from underneath you and off to the side. Hug those knees in. Maybe a little bit of rocking side to side here. And then as you pause, hug the knees in a little more. Maybe curl your forehead up to the knees, like you're making yourself into a little ball. And then we'll lay the head down and bring the feet down. Let's make our way into a little tabletop pose. Finding your way onto all fours. We're going to give a little bit of movement here of cat-cow, just a very easy pose. So inhale, soften the belly, tip up the chin and the tailbone. Exhale, round it in. Again, inhale and exhale. Let's do maybe 5 rounds of that. Again, you're not trying to rush through this pose. Good. Now we're going to do a little bit more back bending on our bellies. So I'm going to face you here. We're going to come into Sphinx pose. So you're going to just come down onto your belly with your elbows up under your shoulders. So you're propped up here. And I like to take my feet a little bit wider than my hips in this pose. So if you look over your shoulder, you might actually see your feet. And then we're going to sink down into this pose while I set the timer. So this Sphinx is just kind of like, it's hot, it's dusty. So you slink down into your shoulders and bring your chin towards or maybe even resting onto your chest. This is really, again, good if you are an obsessive cell phone watcher. This will stretch those muscles at the back of your neck. And then sometimes I find I have to kind of rock my hips a little bit, especially in the first part of this pose, because I tend to press my hips down into the mat and squeeze my glutes. And you want this to be a pretty passive pose. If this back bend is getting to be too much for your upper back, you could always just stack your arms on top of each other and rest your forehead on your arms. That'll give you some degree of a back bend still. passed our halfway mark of this shape. Less than a minute left here. If you brought your chin to your chest, let's go ahead and lift the head back up. And we'll just kind of put a little bit of energy back into those elbows for about the last 10 seconds here. We're going to continue this upper body trend and move into a little shoulder opener. It's not really a little shoulder opener. I don't know why I described it that way. But it's going to be an interesting little position where you're going to do a little roll here. So we're going to come down onto the belly. You're going to take your right arm out to the side. So your right hand's going to be lined up with your right shoulder. You may have to move this arm up or down. You might even have to bend into the elbow. I'm going to put a blanket just under my head here. You could use a blanket or, again, a very small pillow. I have to take my glasses off to do this. Your your left hand's going to come outside your chest. And then you're going to press into that left hand, rolling towards that right arm. Now, just for the sake of keeping it upper body centric here today, let's bend the knees, and so the knees are kind of stacked on top of each other here. And if you find that you can keep that right arm straight, awesome. If you, again, need to shift it or bend it, feel free. And then you can either keep your left hand here as some support, or I like to wrap my left arm behind me, and then it gives me a little bit of some shoulder opening on that left side. And don't worry, the timer will let me know when it's time to get out. This is kind of like you're on the floor looking under your couch for, remote, dog toy, something like that. You have a little less than a minute left here. If you wrap that left arm behind you, go ahead and unwrap here and bring that left hand back to the floor. Go ahead and straighten your legs if you bent them. 10 more seconds here. Then we're going to roll onto our belly. Stay on that right cheek. Just bring the right arm down alongside you, palm up. Bring the left arm down alongside you. And then we'll take it to the other side. So you're going to extend that left arm out inside, kind of in line with that shoulder. Right hand's going to be alongside you. So we'll press in to that right hand, to help us roll to the left. Again, if you need to position that arm differently, do that. And bend your knees so they're just kind of stacked on top of each other. Maybe wrap that right arm around you, if you haven't already. Less than a minute here. If you wrapped that right arm behind you, go ahead and unwrap and bring that right hand back to the floor. Might be a little blood rush happens there. Straighten the legs if they're bent. 10 more seconds here. And then roll onto your belly. We're going to bring that left cheek to the floor, both arms alongside you. Take a deep breath into those back ribs. Open the mouth, sigh the breath out. Then we're going to return to that shape of Sphinx pose. Move my blanket out of the way. Back to that shape of Sphinx. Lift up out the shoulders. Let's look over that right shoulder. And then let's look over that left shoulder. Back to the center. Let's drop that right ear over towards the right shoulder a little bit. Pull your chin in. And we'll take it over to that other side. And we'll come back to the center. Make your way up into that little tabletop position again. Maybe a little cat-cow here one more time. Okay, we're going to do one more thing on our belly for the hips. This kind of looks like we would be training ourselves to go into frog pose. That's not where we're going with it. But we're going to start maybe in Sphinx pose. Bring this right knee out in line with your right hip. Now your right ankle might be in line with that knee. You could take it a little straighter if you feel more open. You could draw it in a little bit if you're feeling really tight. I'm not going to stay in the Sphinx shape. If you're feeling that, go for it. Otherwise, make that little stack of your forearms, and we'll bring our forehead down onto the forearms. We're really trying to make this more of a hip event rather than more of a back bend situation. Now you've been in it for a little bit, so if you feel like you could straighten that right leg a little bit off to the side, feel free. That's going to get you a little bit more into that outer hip IT band area. You have a little more than a minute here. Right, so lean a little bit to your left so you can drag that right leg back to that midline of your mat. Let's pause there. You might rock the hips a little bit side to side. Maybe a big breath in and a big breath out. And then we'll go ahead and go into that other side. So left knee out in line with the hip. I sometimes call this half frog, or to me it sometimes looks like Spider-Man kind of scaling up like a building. But I'm also a nerd. So forehead back to the forearms, if that's the option you picked. You could also rest your cheek on the mat as well. Again, if you felt like the need to somewhat extend that left leg out to the left, you could try that. My hip's not being particularly cooperative today, so I'm keeping mine bent. Lift up our chest a little bit so we can lean to the right and drag that left leg back. Let's bring those hands under those shoulders. Let's press back to child's pose. So hips to the heels. Knees can be together or apart. Heavy head here. going to do a couple of seated positions. So we're going to do a couple of forward folds here. As I said in the beginning, if you are a little tighter in the hips or the low back, a folded blanket is a really good thing to have nearby. And you would want to sit on this rounded edge. And you're going to sit on the edge of it, not like right up in the middle of it. So get your tailbone just kind of right there. First one we're going to do is caterpillar, or a seated forward fold. So feet are going to be about hip width apart. Maybe roll them in a couple of times. And you're going to bring your hands alongside the knees or the shins, and we're going to hinge forward a bit. Now, if you have a low back situation, you may want to actually rest your hands on your legs to keep your spine a little longer and maybe just barely tip your chin down. Because if you have a low back situation, if you round into it, you can actually kind of exacerbate that feeling, and it's not going to feel terribly comfortable or pleasant. But if you don't, feel free to take the hands further and just round into it. Again, just be mindful of what you're doing in that low back. Now this is kind of a little counter to everything that we've done so far. In the back bending department, we've been trying to counter the rounding that we do in our day-to-day life, right? I have a friend who calls it, we end up looking like little boiled shrimp. These next couple of poses, we're kind of embracing that shrimp. This is a good time to see if you're hunching up the shoulders to the ears, or if you're clenching your jaw. Are you making angry eyebrows? About a minute left here. About 10 seconds. So you're not going to run out of this pose. So I would say first thing to do, press into your hands, bring your torso up a little bit, find some length in your spine. Then we'll flex the feet to energize the legs, and we'll walk the hands towards us. When you find yourself upright, take a deep breath in. Big breath out. We're going to bend the knees so we can bring the soles of the feet together for butterfly pose. So butterfly pose is another hip opener and a forward fold. So same idea, we'll go ahead and start our timer here. You can stay very upright and you'll experience a lot more in the inner thigh, probably hip flexor, maybe a little bit in this outer hip. You could bring your hands to your ankles or your feet and just barely hinge forward, keeping that back long. And then that's going to shift a little bit more release into those outer hips. And again, if you feel like you want to round into it, bring your hands to your mat, walk them forward, give into that rounding. And again, let that chin drop down a bit. So this practice today is all about sort of cracking the patterns that we tend to establish. There's a great book I highly recommend called The Body Keeps Score. And it's just ways of, we kind of find little parts of our body to to kind of tuck our holding patterns into, or habits, or our grudges or beliefs, etc. And so this is a way to just kind of maybe get into those areas. For me, this is quite a moment in the hips. So I find that I have to do some long exhales or some exhales through the mouth. You have a bit more than a minute in this pose. And you may find in this last minute that you want to go a little bit deeper into the pose, or you might find that you need to pull back a little bit out of the pose. Honor either feeling. About 10 seconds left in this shape. So again, find that length in your spine first and draw your belly in to support your back. Lengthen spine, maybe press the feet into each other, hands to ankles to help you lift up. Then you might bring the hands to either side of the knees to bring your feet to the floor. I like to kind of just hug my arms around my knees at this point. Find some length in your spine. You might even tip the chin up a little bit into a slight back bend. You know, our hips tend to be the place where we really hold on to a lot of these patterns. So that pose and the one we're about to do, you might find some feelings that come up in those poses. And so our next one, we're going to go into, you're either going to do thread the needle or a shoelace on your back. So we're going to make our way back to our mat, and we're going to lie down, knees bent, feet on the floor. And for needle, you're going to bring your right ankle to your left thigh, and you're going to hug that leg in. And if you're here and you're like, okay, that's enough, you could take that block and put that block under this left foot to hold your legs there. You could interlace hands behind left thigh or take them over that left shin. Now, if you're here and you're like, well, I don't really feel a lot going on in that pose. So you would try to bring your right knee over your left knee into shoelace pose. For me, this is a lot in that right IT band. It's a lot, but it's bearable, it's doable. If it's a lot for you and you're like, holy blank, then I would go back to needle. And I know I'm not looking at my phone, and you're going to be like, well, how's he going to know when to come out? You'll hear it when it goes off. If you're a runner, a walker, a cyclist, this is either of those poses, needle or the shoelace. I would highly recommend you to do it after any of those events. And as we've said in other poses of this practice, try not to clench, try not to recruit your teeth to help you get through this pose, or your eyebrows. This is a little challenging for me because I'm used to looking at the timer. I have no idea how much time is left in this pose. Yay. All right, return that sole of your left foot back to the floor. I want you to stop. Left foot back to the floor. Then see if you can wrap your right thigh over your left thigh. And we're going to slide those hips to the right and then drop those knees over to the left. If that's not a pose that really suits you, arms into letter T or goalpost, you could hug that right knee into the chest and extend that left leg out onto the floor. And sometimes in these supine twists, you'll find that you maybe squeeze the glutes or suck in the belly. Try to soften both of those areas. Try to soften across the chest and the shoulders. And what I mean when I say soften is that I notice that I sometimes will, again, draw shoulders to the ears, or I'll kind of be hiking and holding up, in this case, the right shoulder. And you want to just kind of release effort. So if you're clenching, you're hardening that area. We're looking to soften it. So I like to unwrap the legs first, then bring them back to the center. So get your feet and your hips and your back to the midline of your mat. Full breath in, full breath out. And then we're going to take it to the other side. So left ankle onto that right thigh. Be aware that it might be a different experience for you. Draw that leg in. So again, all those options for supine thread the needle, or seeing if you can get this this left knee over the right knee. And then you can hold on either to outside of the pinky toe side of your foot or outside of your ankle or shin. Sometimes it does help to rock a little bit side to side. And again, look for the places that you can make more passive in your body, particularly around the jaw, the temples, the brow. It's also a good idea to make sure you're not holding the breath. Sometimes when we do poses that are in particularly tight areas, we'll kind of unconsciously hold the breath. So we're going to bring that right foot to the floor and wrap that left thigh over, unless you're doing that other option. Bump your hips over to the left and let your knees drop over to your right. Again, arms can be in a little goal pose. I find on this side for me, I have to come into almost like Shavasana arms, particularly on that left side. Again, just kind of scan to see where you can soften here. Then that same notion of uncrossing the legs first, then coming back to the center. A full breath in, a full breath out. We're going to do one more pose on our backs and before Shavasana. It's called banana pose. So you're going to extend out your arms and your legs. You're going to take your legs straight out, and then you're going to take your arms overhead. You're going to scoot legs over to bottom left corner. You're going to pull down your shirt so you're not exposing belly. You're going to scoot arms and shoulders over to the top left corner of your mat. Now, this is a shape in and of itself. You could just stay right here. Or you could take a hold of that right wrist with your left hand and maybe cross that right ankle over the left wrist. So one more thing for the side body. If the crossing of the ankle feels too much in your hip, undo. If the holding on to the right wrist and giving that a little extra pull feels too much for shoulder or neck, undo. This is a really good pose to do like before you get out of bed. let go of that right wrist first, then uncross that ankle. Draw everything back to the center. Again, a big breath in, a big breath out. Let's just go to the other side. So shift legs to bottom right corner, shift upper body to top right corner. Either taking hold of that left wrist with right hand and maybe crossing that left ankle over a right ankle. Again, if you did it on the other side, do it here. If you didn't, then just forego it. About 3 more breaths here. And then you're going to let go of that left wrist, uncross that left ankle, draw everything back to the center, bring down the arms, hug in the knees, give everything a little hug here. And then where you are, you can just extend your legs and drop your arms alongside you as we prepare to head into Shavasana. And before we go into Shavasana, we'll do a little bit of breath work. So bring one hand to your belly, one hand to your heart. We're going to do a technique called Dirga Swasam, or 3-part breath. Inhale, fill up your belly, fill up your ribs, fill up your chest. Pause at the top. Then as you exhale through nose or mouth, empty the chest, the ribs, the belly. Let's do that again. Inhale, belly, ribs, chest. Pause a little longer. Exhale, chest, ribs, belly. Good. Inhale, belly, ribs, chest. Pause. Exhale, chest, ribs, belly. One more time. Inhale, belly, ribs, chest. Pause. Exhale, chest, ribs, belly. Then take a deep breath in and open the mouth. Exhale. I'm going to read to you from Mark Nepo's Book of Awakenings, one of my favorite books. It's May 20th is the entry if you have the book and you want to find it later. Breaking patterns. If I contradict myself, I contradict myself. I contain multitudes. Walt Whitman. We create patterns that others depend on. And then the last thing we ever imagined happens. We grow and change. And then to stay vital, we must break the patterns we created. There is no blame or fault in this. It is commonplace in nature. Watch the ocean and the shore do their dance of build up and crumble, and you'll see this happen daily. We know we are close to this threshold when we hear someone say, "You're not yourself," or "That was out of character for you." What is difficult at this juncture is to resist either complying with how others see us or withholding who we really are. The challenge, which I don't do well but stay committed to, is to say to those we love, "I am more than I have shown you and more than you are willing to see. Let's work our love and know each other more fully." So as you pause here in Shavasana, things that came up maybe for you within the course of the practice that you identify as not serving you anymore. Maybe here in this Shavasana, there's a willingness to let that go, whether it's a habit or a grievance or a story or a belief. If you have 3 to 5 more minutes to stay here in Shavasana, I hope you can. If you want to pause here or stop here and go on about your day, I thank you for taking this time to practice with me. Namaste.